balancing power, right? I think this discussion will continue the discussion that was held on the first day of the festival, and I know some of you attended. And I think it's fitting in the sense that this year Chobi Mela sees the festival going back to its roots. Shahidul Alam said that this meant a much more raw and audience-oriented festival. And although it's important to stress that the festival Chobi Mela sees this as an opportunity, we all of us know that it's also related to the last 6-month events. And as a matter of fact, as I'm speaking, Shahidul is attending a court hearing. So this underlines, I think, the importance of the discussion we're about to hold today. That is, how do cultural institutions, and I understand cultural institutions here in the largest sense of the term, including the media, so how do the content producers that we are deal with power. And so the panel is called Balancing Power because the power we want to look at is a power that cultural institutions engage with and sometimes confront, but also a power that they shape or that they leverage. So it's important to understand the various nature of power, and I hope that we'll have enough time to get the discussion through 3 phases. First, perhaps to understand the confrontation between cultural institutions and external power, be them political, bureaucratic, but also corporate. We'll then try to assess the conditions of engagement with power, and here we will discuss the complicated relationship with funding and donors. And finally, I hope we'll have enough time to talk about the power that cultural institutions hold. That is, power asserting choice, setting trends, shaping narratives, and leveraging others' power. So to talk about all this, I've got 3 professional practitioners, all women as it happens. First, Onoita Majumdar of Imal South Asia. So Onoita started a career as a journalist. She was posted in Kabul for several years. And in 2012, she became the editor of Imal South Asia, which is producing, certainly familiar with the publication, producing critical long-form reportage on a wide range of topics with interest to South Asia. So from its funding in 1997 up to 2016, Himal was based in Kathmandu, and then on that year, 2016, was forced to leave Kathmandu because of what Onoita called strangulation by bureaucracy. So the magazine was not able anymore to obtain work permits, to access the grants it has received, and we'll talk about this, of course. And then Onoita then led the shifting of the magazine to Colombo, where it is now based, and where it operates as a pure player, so online only, but still with the same ethos of independent, in-depth, quality reportage. Marina Tabassum, who's the principal of Marina Tabassum Architect. In 2016, Marina won the Aga Khan Award for architecture for the design of a mosque here in Dhaka. Marina is also known for the design of the Museum of Independence in Dhaka, which she co-authored. And she is also an educator. She taught at Harvard University Graduate School of Design. She taught at the University of Texas and at Prague University here in Dhaka. And since 2015, she's also the director of the academic program at the Bengal Institute for Architecture, Landscape and Settlements, which is an institution based here in Dhaka and active in urban studies and public architecture practice. So it would be interesting as well having the 2 approaches as an educator and also as a practicing architect to discuss Marina's relation with power. And finally, Anupama Sekar of the Asia Europe Foundation. Anupama is the director of the culture department at the Asia Europe Foundation. The foundation is a permanent cultural institution which gets its mandate directly from power, from a political body, the Asia Europe meeting, which is a body bringing together the leaders of 51 Asian and European countries. The foundation is an important grantor and facilitator in the field of culture and the arts. It supports events such as this Chobi Mela, and it also supports mutual cultural practice through mobility grants. So three very different profiles, three profiles dealing at different levels with power and in different capacities. So I'd like to start with you, Nota, perhaps. So in a September 2016 editorial explaining why Himal would suspend its publication, you wrote about specific threats that institutions such as Himal face, and specifically about the targeting of individuals who work for these institutions by smear campaigns and accusation of financial misconduct, for example. And I found this interesting because, of course, it's something that we've seen happening here in Bangladesh as well. So speaking from the angle of power, do the power of cultural institutions mainly rely on their reputations? Like this attack on individuals and specifically on reputation is interesting. I would like to know your opinion on the link between reputation and power in the cultural framework.
Thank you, Hadrien. You have a very difficult task of bringing together very disparate kind of fields, and I certainly feel a bit like a fish out of the water because I've been purely a journalist for now 30 years and very little to do with arts. The last few days have been a real education and have made me extremely nervous. This session doesn't have a lot of visuals, but I will start with one which kind of places us and also perhaps my kind of journalism. So many of you must be familiar with this map, but I don't know if you can already see what's wrong with this map, because I'm putting it upside down. So yeah, sorry, I turned on the mic. So this is Himal's conception of South Asia, which, as you can see, we call it the right side up map. And the idea behind this map is to challenge the popular perceptions of the way one looks at things. And of course, I think the discussions here, what Chobi Mela is about, what Pathshala is about, really go to the core of that there are different ways of seeing things. Being a journalist for so long, I think journalism has a very core principle of challenging power, and that is something that one takes as part of one's job. And during the course of my reporting, I have reported from Punjab in the years where there was police operations to wipe out the militancy, which led to a lot of human rights violations. Subsequently reported on Kashmir for many years from what I considered was the perspective of the Kashmiri people, which did not sit very well with the Indian government, which made clear its dislike of me. So subsequently going and working and living and working out of Afghanistan from Kabul for 8 years, which had its own challenges. And that's kind of par for the course, so difficult as it is, you do it. But I think what I've encountered since joining Himal, first in Nepal and now of course we moved to Colombo, is that threats are becoming far more insidious and sophisticated, especially from powers. Largely I would, in our case, talk about state power. I think direct attacks and censorship have certainly not gone away. But I think a lot of governments are becoming far more aware of the fact that there is a cost to pay if you actually go and overtly shut down spaces and attack people. So what is happening now is the use of government bureaucracy, of the infrastructure to attack institutions and civil society spaces. And we're seeing this all over South Asia. Governments will begin investigations into organizations for so-called bad administration, finance. This has a fantastic advantage. One, you're not being accused as a government of censoring. Two, none of us can be really sure about the financial, the finances of any organization or how its administration is run. And even if we, let's say, think that the people are honest, we can still not be sure that they've done the paperwork. So how do you actually stand up and protect someone? In our case, in Himalayan, when we were in Nepal, it was even easier. We were never investigated. Our founding editor, who was our chairman at the time, there was an investigation into him, an investigation which later on clearly proved to be mala fide, and the person who initiated this, a very politically powerful figure, was finally, there was an impeachment process against him. He had to step down from his job. But of course the cases still continue, that's another story. But in our case, we were just part of the collateral damage. So by the simple expedient of seizing the files, just the paperwork, and keeping it on the back burner in a frozen position for more than a year, they made sure that we didn't have the permission to use the grants that we had got. They didn't process our visas for our non-Nepali staff. The bank started delaying our remittances by as much as 6 months. I mean, we pay our contributors for every article, so then beyond the point you can't pay your contributors. And over a period of time, the bank balance ran out, so we had no choice but to look for a different location. And at no point were we investigated, at no point were we asked questions, at no point were we actually denied permission. That was the beauty of it. If we were denied permission, we could have challenged it. It was just a state of endless limbo. And it's also extremely hard to mobilize the public support. You know, people said, what can we do? And I was like, release the paperwork doesn't really have the kind of, you know, the panache as saying, you know, remove the censorship or release the person, or it's something very, very hard to get public support on. But that being said, I think we are really failing in our imaginations. In the creative space, all of us are so focused on our content, and we'll give our life and blood and lots more besides for that, and we know how to do it. But we have not matched the imagination of people who want to shut down these spaces with coming up with creative ways of countering it. And I think there are, and I think we'll be discussing that probably later in the discussion. But I think we really need to look at the fact that the back end, the institutional part of our organizations, no matter how small they are and no matter how good we think we are and how honest we think we are, the back end needs attention, and there have to be ways of getting to that. And most importantly, I think, is the issue of solidarity. I think a lot of us are small organizations struggling on our own in far-flung spaces, but there can be not just, you know, not just empathy, not just statements, but there are, I think, a lot of practical ways in which we can support each other's work, and I hope we'll get to that part of it later in the discussion.
Yeah, solidarity is certainly something good. I think my mic.
Hello? Okay. We will come back to solidarity because it's certainly something that was again mentioned in the first discussion, first day, and something we want to look at. But before that, I would like to come back to the idea of political agendas and how one can engage as a cultural institution or as content producer with political agendas. Marina, when we were preparing this panel, you told me that political agendas are always present in big infrastructure projects, but that should not blur the bigger picture of the project. And I found this interesting. Could you elaborate a bit on this?
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you for the invitation. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you all for being here as well. What we were basically talking about, or let's say, power always have certain agendas, of course, for the fact that, when there is election, they come with certain agendas. They need to satisfy certain things that they have in mind. In our case, which as a story, it would be better if I just narrate the whole issue, then that would be easier. It was basically with the Museum of Independence that we talked about. And the Museum of Independence, which was a project by the Awami League government. It was a competition that was launched in 1997, and the Awami League government came to power in 1996. So basically, it was an agenda of, where the government came to power with the agenda to establish the history of independence in a way, to restore in many ways, which had been blurred over the years. And as a child, I grew up in the 70s and in the 80s. After 75, when we were given textbooks, I remember in schools, textbooks were changed. Of course, that's also again power in play. And so in school, we would have the old version of the book for 6 months because the new book would not arrive on time when the school began. So we were stuck with the older version for 6 months, and for the next 6 months we would have the new book. So as even a child in the 5th grade, I could tell the difference between what was the content of the earlier version and what we were given as the new version. So that sort of was a way of erasing the memory of the war and the history. So when the government came to power, especially the Awami League government in the late 90s, that was one of the mandates. And in that sense, at that very moment in time, I think it was a very important mandate that you establish, or at least try to restore the history. And for that reason, that project, and we always know that architecture and power always has a very connection, a very integral connection, because architecture has always been very instrumental in establishing power through history. And so architecture and power never has it's almost like a patronizing relationship that we share. So in that sense, that project actually was quite legitimate at that point in time. So that's where I was talking about that, even though now we see that it has turned into more of a nationalistic agenda over the years, but at that very point in time it was important, and so we all basically really celebrated that point. But I wouldn't probably say the same thing with the sequence of events that has followed afterwards. So
yeah, it's indeed interesting to see the arc of history and what was true at the end of the 90s, perhaps less so today. And yeah, to continue again on this idea of agenda, it would be interesting to hear perhaps the other side of the story, because so the Euro Foundation is an important grantor, and I was wondering if there are agendas that you that you as a grantor have to follow from your mandate, and perhaps also that your grantees are expected to follow. So are there guidelines that your grantees have when you give a grant? And have you ever been challenged also on this by grantees? that would perhaps refuse grant or say that they didn't want to follow agendas?
It's a very big question. I will start by saying that most of our grantees sometimes refuse a grant, not because of agendas, but because the paperwork is just too complex. They're like, oh, I have to give all these reports, it's okay, I'll raise my money somewhere else. So sometimes the practicality comes before bigger political issues, I have to say. The Asia Europe Foundation, where I work, receives money from 51 countries, including Bangladesh. And I'm a professional, I'm not seconded by governments. The foundation has a board of 50 people, one from each of these countries, including the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Bangladesh. All our bosses in the past have always been seconded employees. By seconded, I mean they are sent by a specific government, usually very high up, ambassador, etc. And it is only in the last, I would say, 5 years that at the director level, so directors decide strategy, and I'm in charge of the strategy for arts and culture for the entire foundation, which operates across 50 countries. And I would say that power itself is not something that stays still. The foundation was set up as a way to connect governments and civil society. That's why we were not set up as a secretariat. A secretariat basically does what a certain intergovernmental agenda tells you to do. So that's why we are different from UNESCO. So on the board, on the top, of course, there are government people because it's their money, they're watching over us. But the people who actually do the work are professionals. So everyone who works in the culture team, has some sort of a cultural background. And what has been interesting is the power shift. Because for the first time, 5 years ago in 2015, our board, the 50 governments, decided maybe it's better to have a professional as the director of culture than a diplomat. Because previously, for 15 years, we had diplomats. And diplomats see culture as cultural diplomacy. Let's take some folk musicians from Bangladesh. They can perform on the side when the leaders are having their dinner. Arts and culture, check. But that's how they see the world. So in a way, you have to also influence and advocate to them to change their mind. And on the other hand, professionals see it as cultural relations. So for me, in terms of the agenda, we were set up with a very broad mandate. And it is behind this mandate that we hide, which is to promote people-to-people relations between Asia and Europe. So I think the fantastic thing of the governments when they set it up is that they kept this broad mandate. This broad mandate allows you to virtually do anything because it's not specific. So in a sense, this is the official agenda of the foundation, but in practical matters, of course, there's one side you have bureaucracy, paperwork can kill you, and as you were saying, sometimes they get to you through paperwork. When you don't have the right paperwork, you are on the wrong side of things. So it's a way to say no when you cannot say no another way. But in practical matters, if you have 50 people on your board and only 40 people working at the foundation, so you see the ratio between the board and the actual staff, different countries, of course, have different agendas. But I think what for me, I've been working at this foundation for 10 years and I'm still smiling and I survive working in a quasi-government agency because I think the idea was to connect government and civil society. So they put in a foundation, both government and civil society people, and you have to work together. So if I can't convince my boss, who represents now Germany, I cannot convince my board, I can't move ahead. So in that sense, it's a very innovative experiment for this power dynamic within the foundation, because both sides have equal power. You can negotiate the power. Not all the staff are seconded employees. If it was an organization with all seconded employees, A, I will not be there. B, I don't think we will be able to support Chobi Mela. So, and so this negotiation also shows that in the construct, power has also been given to civil society on the professional side. So now it's how you play it. But on the other hand, I have to say, it is in terms of staffing, in terms of people working on the ground in the office every day, the amount of emotional labor that goes into negotiating with your board, with ministries of culture, with ministries of foreign affairs, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of emotional work. It's a lot of confidence building, trust building. It's just emotionally exhausting. But this is why a lot of people also have burnout and they quit, because the view is very long term. The view is extremely long-term, and you have to be sure of your mission as a cultural worker before you enter this foundation. And so in terms of, practically when it goes down to our grantees, and we have at this moment given to Chobi Mela, through a special grant that we set up just a few months ago, also being inspired by what has happened in Bangladesh and with Drik and Shahidul, a special travel grant for artists at risk. So this was sort of our institutional response to the issue. It's not always easy for us to say free Shahidul, for instance, because we represent so many governments. But on the other hand, it's possible for us to make an institutional gesture, and which is setting up of a very small travel fund exclusively for artists or arts organizations at risk. And now that this is in our system, we hope it will grow. So in terms of our grantees, I would say that, at the moment, the way we deal with them is the way the entire program is constructed is definitely from the point of view of the artists. It's just that we use public funds. So we have been able to give money to Chobi Mela. We have been able to publicize this event on our social media platforms. Our board is aware of it. Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Bangladesh has been officially informed of this support. And they replied saying, oh, we cannot be there, but this is great. Okay, we take that as a positive endorsement. But I think this also comes from the fact that there is an arm's length relationship between the board and the foundation. The board does not tell us what to do. The board says that you must promote people-to-people relations in culture. Every single program of the foundation is presented to the board has to approve it, and that's the moment when they ask the tough questions. But does this mean you will be supporting this kind of work or that kind of work? And I think that's where you have to defend. Once the approval is given, then it's fine. So I think at that moment, it's also for me, having been at the foundation for 10 years and seeing board members for 10 years, it is also a form of confidence building with them, that they know, okay, maybe she knows what she's doing. Because in 10 years, we haven't rocked the boat, but we have supported artists or institutions. If we sometimes name them, you could be questioned further. So I think it's, in that sense, the artist is at the center of our vision. And we are very, very careful with the way we form, even the application forms. We've been trying to do what is necessary for paperwork, because documentation is critical with public funding. You cannot imagine the level of scrutiny we have. We take money from 51 governments. The amount of paperwork to prove to them that their money is being spent well, spent properly, and that accounting is perfect. Sometimes our finance officers are just looking completely like, it's very tough, but that's a way to prove it's for confidence building. So we keep all that in mind, but when we translate it into what we ask our grantees to give to us, we try to simplify it. After hours of negotiation with our finance director as to what do you need legally for auditing? What do you need? And then we will try to translate it into a mechanism that's easy for the artists. And this is not easy, because half the time is spent negotiating within the organization. All my advocacy is directed to my board, to my finance director, to the people inside my organization, because there's no need for me to advocate to this audience that there are problems with censorship or there are. So in that sense, I think the entire power play is happening within the foundation. So it's how much, resilience or grit you have to push that forward, because then the agenda changes from the inside. But if you don't push back, there is push constantly from the other side. Do these kind of projects. Let's take dancers from Myanmar to perform in Paris. Okay, are we in 1901? So the agendas are always there, but I think the pushback, confidence building, you have to have a long-term view. And it can be exhausting, emotionally exhausting, because your results will be seen in 5 years.
Well, thank you. And we'll come back also to the idea of leveraging power in dealing with power behind closed doors. But before that, you mentioned the funding, and talking about funding, Onwita, again, when we were preparing this panel, you stressed how Himal started at a time when funding for a good cause was easily available, and you explained that now everyone is struggling for funding, and that donors put more and more restriction on what they want you to do with their money. So could you tell us a bit more about these restrictions and the possibility, if any, to challenge them? And also, I think it's important to talk about self-censorship, because are these restrictions, which come from agendas, as we know, do they impact on then what you say or what you don't say and the way you say it?
I think I'll start by saying that I feel there are no absolute spaces. There's nothing like absolute freedom. And it's probably possible to quarrel on anything one does and everything one does and see whether it's challenging enough or radical enough. But I think one has to decide which battles to fight and pick and choose one battles. That being said, I also think there are absolutes and there should be red lines, which one should be clear about, at least in a very broad way, what you will not compromise on while negotiating with power. And this would be power at various levels. You've talked now about donors and their agendas. For us, because we're a media organization, and I would think this would be absolutely different for cultural organizations, people making films or photography. For us, it becomes imperative to take money only from an extremely small pool of donors. I'm desperate for money, even as I say that, and we have a shortfall, as I'm sure lots of people here do. Exactly. And that being said, I'm still thumbing my nose at some donors and trying to do it diplomatically when they come to us, because we work in the sphere of South Asia, and if you as a government have a very strong agenda within South Asia, I think it's not fair to our readership that we take money from the government and then write about the government. It's probably not fair to the government either. So the restriction first is almost like a self-censorship, I would say, where you take your money from. In terms of donors, I think what I've heard, and I've been in this fundraising only very recently after I joined Himal, but what I hear from Himal's history of 30 years is that people believed that the magazine was trying to do something special, was trying to connect South Asia, was trying to report on the unheard voices, marginalized stories, and that the people running it were unselfish and honorable, I would say, and that was enough to get a grant. But that doesn't work anymore. Now it's a lot of paperwork. Now it's figuring out where the money is, what the money is there for. I think sometimes you also see a lot of organizations who look at what project is getting funding and then work around it. The other way is to see what you're doing and try to find money for what you're doing. So the two approaches. Ours is very much to see who can support us with what we're doing. Where we don't compromise is we will not have anyone telling us what we will publish. But we get pressure, for example, one big pressure has been for us to start generating revenue. But a lot of the time the model the donors want us to follow is an NGO model with the kind of reporting, lack of flexibility in the use of funds. You can't become commercially viable unless you have flexibility, so you're caught in this war. In terms of self-censorship, I will broaden it a bit. Recently, for example, in Sri Lanka, we had what was being described by Sri Lankans as a constitutional coup, where the Prime Minister changed overnight, and finally the court stepped in and have restored the government. But for us it was a difficult situation, because it's no secret that Himal has written very critically about the Rajapaksa government, and at that time I think several of our issues were banned in Sri Lanka. So the first thought was, oh my God, we just landed in Colombo and here we go again, you know, what are we going to do? Some people, including one person from a donor community, suggested, oh, we should take the government head on and keep writing and reporting about it. And as someone who's an editor and a manager, I had several other impulses as well. We did write about it, but I felt we should wait on the confrontation, and this was not the time to create a fuss which would get us immediately thrown out. There are also, apart from us, and I'm not from Sri Lanka, so it's easier perhaps, but we also have colleagues who are Sri Lankan citizens, and you have to make sure that they are not put at risk by what you do. So we recalibrated, and we thought, let's hold our breath, let's see where this goes while we figure out what we're going to do, have backup plans before we go all out. So that's some kind of, not a self-censorship, but you decide how much, how far to go and at what point. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, very much so. Which is a question of idealism and compromission, or partial compromissions. Again, we had an intense discussion before the discussion that we are holding here, but very interesting as well. Also partly interesting because I'm not versed too much in the architecture practice and what it entails in terms of dealing with power. So, I mean, you said, Marina, I'd love to be an idealist, but I can't afford it. And yeah, certainly, again, with the context of this Chobi Mela happening in a specific context, and it struck me again. And so I wanted to ask you, about this sentence, of course, and when you said that the core of your activity was to engage with different kinds of power and making sure that everybody has skin in the game. So why this engagement with power in your practice clashes with idealism? Could you elaborate on this?
Yeah, well, I told you what? What did I say?
That you'd love to
I'd
be
love to be an idealist, yeah. Sure. Yeah, well, if I would be, if Shah Jahan was my client and I was the architect to be designing Taj Mahal, that would be probably the most ideal situation, because there would be nobody in between. But we live in a very different world, right? So there are quite a few things here. One is the political will. So the political will and the architect's intentions are always in line, because political power is trying to establish something by using architecture as an instrument. And we architects like to glorify, so we are absolutely in the same page when any project is launched. So there is no problem with that. The problem starts when you go into implementation. And then the political will is there, your intentions are there, but then there are the bureaucrats and the technocrats. And the thing is, they do not have, what is their gain from this? They're working for the government, they get a salary, that's just about it. I'm gaining a name by building a project, it's my portfolio, so that's how they view it, because I'll become famous. And of course the political party obviously will become again elected in the next election. So for them, you have to create ways of, to create a stake into the entire system. So at times you just have to keep a blind eye to be able to implement the project, to make it happen. You just have to at times just adjust or compromise and see things being inflated. And so that's what I'm saying, that even if I want to be an idealist, I don't take part in it, but even if I see it, I keep a blind eye to that. And that's the only way of, in a way, making things happen. If you really believe in, something good and something that will good come out of one project or some infrastructure that is being developed. So that's the irony of our time, but I think, that's how
of course, that's a very specific and illuminating example of how to engage with power.
Right.
But you went a bit further, because you told me that you had to make sure that everybody had skin in the game. What do you mean?
Well, there are a number of projects. I don't know which one to talk about, but anyway. One was, I can talk about the monument itself, because it's our, it's made for the country. It's it's built based on our own freedom, and that was gained through a lot of selfless sacrifices. So it's a tower of independence, and we came up with the idea of a tower of light. That was back in 1997-98, And at that time, you know, the government, the political will definitely was there. They were very excited. They wanted to build this project, but the technocrats, I would say, the Ministry of Public Works, let's say, they were not comfortable with this idea of a tower of glass, which is not seen anywhere in the world. Nobody has built it before. It's not something doable. So they made a few trips abroad. Okay, they went and met a lot of experts who are, experts with making glass and steel structures, and everybody said it's a very, it's a very buildable project. There is no problem with that. They came back. So basically they were just delaying the entire process, even though the government was pushing for it. We were pushing hard for the fact that they should, but they were just delaying it constantly until, at a very late stage, they floated a tender for an international tender. And then at the end, they had someone, they selected a contractor, but by that time, the government's time was over. There was new election, and in the new election, a new government came in. So then that government was not interested in this project at all. And obviously, it just got completely blocked. So for the next, another, I don't know, maybe 5 years at least, yeah, definitely 5 years, or more than that, it was kind of locked. And we had to suffer a lot during this time because this is an ongoing project. The next government said, when the project budget was 100 crore, they slashed it down to 10 crores and said, you have to build something, build us a tower which can be done in 10 crores taka. So 10 crores is not a budget for a national monument. It's almost like $1 million, yeah. So it's not a budget for a national, it's not about the money, but it's about the will and what you are projecting. It's something for the future, right? You are celebrating something, and you cannot compromise on your own freedom, which you have achieved over a long struggle and war. So basically, when they told us, and we were quite much under pressure to design something within this very, like 10th of a budget, we just sent them an email saying that if you don't have the money, don't build it. Wait till we are, and they said that we are a poor country, we cannot, spend this amount of money to build a project, build us something simple, and then build us something in concrete, not in glass. So we said, if we are poor, if we don't have the money, then we suggest that we don't build it. Let's wait till we have the money and we are able to create something which the entire nation will cherish for hundreds of years. So that was our, and so we basically did not, and they terminated us as consultants. So we were gone from the scene until again the next election came, and then again the political party was changed, and the new will, with a new vigor and with the election mandate that this project has to be completed, that we finally were able to then pursue. And then at least the government was really pushing hard, and the engineers understood that this time they just cannot delay it any further, and then we were able to finish it. So it took us 16 years to actually complete the project. But so that's how it gets done, So you have to have a will. And at times, what I was also probably, just to take a little more time, is talk about the display inside the museum, which was done by the National Museum, actually. And the National Museum could not employ us as consultants, so they could not pay us any fee. They said, we don't have, according to the books, there is no way we can commission somebody directly, so you have to say, okay, fine, we do voluntary work, what can I do? It's my project, I have to finish it, right? So then no fee for us, and then they came up with an idea, why don't we include the fee with the contractor's payment, and then the contractor can give it to you. And my idealistic self would tell you I would not take money from the contractor, right? That would be the wrong thing to do. Even if it's my fee, why would I take it from the contractor? So I said, I don't need any fee. Let's just get it done. And so basically that's how things get done here, and you know, so basically.
But I wouldn't say that it's that it contradicts idea. It's another way to pursue an idea. You spoke about a lot of renouncement there.
Yeah, I mean the thing is, you know, you need to, since it's a very informal way of doing things, it's not like a really formal. I mean, it goes through a formal process, but there is a lot of gray areas and a lot of informality that are there. So if you have your goal set that I want the project to be done and finished, then you have to just find ways of doing it.
Yeah, well, I think that's idealistic in a sense. But to get out of bureaucracy, to get out of technocracy, and to come back again to the idea of the institution here, perhaps. Anupama, how can institutions leverage the power they have, again, to focus on the remote idea, the thing that's promoted on the website, that maybe that gets obliterated in the day-to-day writing of things. So again, how can institution make sure that to integrate the process of artistic production into institutional activities, and also to foster participative public? I think it's one of your goals, rather than reach to consuming audience. So how do these kind of ideas do not get obliterated?
I think with big institutions, the challenge in the end, it comes down to the people. So we have, in an institution like ours, two layers of people. The diplomats who are seconded, who will keep moving, because that's the nature of their operation. So who does the institutional memory rest with? Which is why I think it's critical to build core professional staff, people who are cultural workers. So in a way, I think it's this core of the cultural workers who hold the institutional memory and who can shape it. And for us, the challenge is also how to stay in contact with what is happening in 50 countries while being physically based in Singapore, which is really at one end of our constituency. And I think this is where it is critical to have networks on the ground. I mean, our relationship, for instance, with Chobi Mela is not that I'm here today and then I'm gone and then I never talk to Tanzim again. It's a constant connection with them, not necessarily to always fund them, no, but to just know what is happening, and not always are we able to support them, but to keep them at the back of your head, and to see in other contexts, okay, maybe Tanzim needs to be introduced, or Chobi Mela needs to be introduced with X there, to make those connections. I think having your pulse on the ground constantly by building this informal community, rather than just being a grantor who comes in today, we have a contract, you know, once we pay them for, you know, what we offered them, the contract is technically over. I don't need to continue to communicate with Chobi Mela. But we in fact communicated with Shahidul before Bangladesh was a member of the foundation, because someone told us, you're organizing an Asia-Europe photo forum. You seem to have only 20% Asian mentors, all your mentors are European. There is a person called Shahidul Alam, you should invite him. And of course, from our side, this was even before my time, the answer, what is his nationality? Because we are bound by nationality questions and we cannot pay for people who don't come from the member countries. And someone said, it's bureaucracy, it's technical, because you can be caught out for that. We are only allowed to spend our money on the citizens of the 51 countries. And now we have a new debate around this question, because you know, it's not like the old times that we live and work in our home countries. I don't live and work in my home country, I haven't for 10 years. We have also the case of stateless people, of refugees, who are holding, for instance, last year we had an interesting problem with an applicant who has legal papers, who's stateless, but has legal papers, is living and working in Germany with proper documentation for the last 4 years. He assumed he is eligible to apply because he's living and working in Germany. He's not a German national. Our side said, on the technical side, they said, no, this person is ineligible, but he's holding. So the whole question of where you live is so critical now, because we all live in different places. We don't live But you see, this was for us a moment to reconsider our bigger strategy, and we found a way out, which is also through this new travel grant, Artists at Risk, where we have two partners putting money. Our money, money of the Asia Europe Foundation, will technically go to those who have the passport of the 51 countries, but our partner is willing to expand the scope to those living and working in the 51 countries. So we don't have to put our money there, someone else will. So this happens only because there was a case, and the story of that case was not just, okay, X is ineligible, let's move on to our selection because we have 300 other applications to read. But these problems are documented, they are discussed back with the community. The community gives you suggestions, sometimes money, ideas, and you try to solve the problem through an institutional or a mechanism. So that when this case repeats itself, we don't take our hands and say, but sorry, but you're ineligible. And this was what also happened when we invited Shahidul to be a mentor at our photo forum in 2008 when Bangladesh was not a member. The official answer was, you can have Shahidul there, no problem. We cannot pay for him. So who's going to pay for him? We actually put out we spoke to friends and Nikon footed the bill. They said, no problem, we can foot the bill to have Shahidul. So then you bypass the technicality. Shahidul, on paperwork you are clean because you are not, he is Bangladeshi, it is written there, but you didn't pay for him. But he is there, and then no one has a problem of him being a mentor. So this is how also our relationship with Shahidul began. So I think, but to make these decisions, you need to have a peer community. So our relationship with our grantees or partners is more of being peers. They are our ears on the ground, they tell us about issues. We hear from peers in 50 countries. We try in our head to patch a story, and then when the moment is right, we think, okay, for this project or to solve this problem, maybe we need to call X, Y, Z, or maybe we need to connect X and Y. And I think this is the real work that we do, beyond giving a grant, beyond making those kind of very practical things that will help the artists, but to build these kind of connections and stories and problems in our head and find the right moment to connect. Because in the end, I see the job as how to build long-term alliances between artists in these 50 countries, but also alliances based on fairness, trust, and reciprocity, not to have the European mentor always teaching the Asian, students, how to flip that. So I think this alliance building, and this comes back to the issue of solidarity that we spoke about, is the critical work, beyond what we do as our mandate practically. And that's also the challenge.
Yeah, thank you. Well, it's exactly that. When you mentioned the idea of peers and of network on the ground, I think that touches upon the issue of solidarity that we certainly want to discuss. So, Onoita, you told me that you thought solidarity should not be a slogan, but in concrete terms could really help institutions such as yours, and you had also the intuition that it could certainly help institutions such as this festival, such as Chobi Mela. And then I'd be interested to try to define this solidarity, how it should play out at the institutional level. And I'm interested also to see if we could imagine a model of solidarity that gets out of circumstances. So of course, the arrest of Shahidul, for example, triggers an enormous amount of solidarity. It's very visible, but in concrete terms, how can this last, and how can this perhaps overtake the emotional effect and goes further and probably also deeper?
I think Shahidul's case is absolutely a really good example of this, because there's an amazing global mobilization around his arrest, and subsequently great joy globally when he was released. But I think
but on bail.
Exactly, on bail, and the case continues, and this is the point at which it becomes much harder to mobilize, and when you try to speak about against it, governments will say, well, the law should take its course, and of course we all want the law to take its course, but we don't want the law to be abused. So how do we keep that continuity? And given the nature of these attacks, I think documentation of these kind of attacks becomes extremely important, because I think documentation also reveals a pattern of abuse. It just by the simple task of showing when cases are registered or investigations are launched, because it is the process which kills you, not the outcome. So if you document when cases are being launched, against whom they're being launched, is the government concluding the process, over a period of time, you will be able to go beyond just say a larger than life figure like Shahidul and get document other excesses which have happened here in similar ways. You will be able to do it over a regional scale and demonstrate how the government is abusing its power. So that is one thing I think is really needs to be done. The other part of solidarity is we are facing very similar challenges in a region which is so interconnected, and we understand each other's challenges and we understand each other's spaces. We, for example, would not be alive today if the Sri Lankan community, which became our board for a new company we had to set up, did not immediately embrace us. And we knew there were a lot of good people in Sri Lanka, but you're going with a lot of political baggage when you're getting shut down in a country like Nepal, and then you're going and asking people to become part of your board. And everybody has very limited leverage, you know. I mean, you use your influence, you use your space, and you're also using it up. So how many things does one want to take on? But every person we approached in Sri Lanka said, yes, we will be on your board. No questions asked. So I think that also gave me the idea that if we are not able as institutions to do everything that we want to do in one particular country, and that is becoming increasingly the case in South Asia because of a resurgence of ultranationalism, why don't we think of a more of an incubator model which can travel around? So, and this is something we discussed with Tanzim when things were much worse, and we weren't sure whether Chobi Mela itself would be possible. We said, why not have a Chobi Mela which is in several countries in the region and have something here, but maybe on a smaller scale and do something here. And that's also true for institutions. You know, doing maybe different programs where they're more possible. That would be one thing which I think would be, and the other part I think of solidarity is we all come with very different skill sets. So why don't we try and extend in a very concrete way? And I think maybe this even needs to be part of a larger platform where our skill set is editing, and we can do it so much more easily. And we actually, again with Tanzi, we were discussing yesterday about the world of art and photography is sometimes very insular and people write for themselves. And we were talking about collaborating perhaps, because our job in our magazine is to bridge the gap between academia and journalism and to make the dense more accessible to a wider public. So why don't we talk about collaborating on that? And similarly, I think if different people share their skills, that can be a huge platform for building very practical solidarity. And one thing I think on which we really need a lot of help, and this is probably something which donors can also think about, and I keep coming back to that, is the back end. We are all pathetic at paperwork, admin, and finance, and we do our best. But we fall short because this is the last reason why we are doing the work we can. Are there actually ways of setting up, you know, a practical set of skills which we can all share? Can there be people sent even by donors? Can there be a package where, you know, you fill in the requisite work in a simple way, and which doesn't either kill you fulfilling it, or kill you because you weren't able to fulfill it and therefore you fell into some kind of trap. So I think one needs to move beyond the obvious of the collaboration in the creative space and also get into that part.
But these were very specific ideas. I like the idea of...
It's just practical survival.
No, but the idea of pollinating events is certainly in the context of South Asia is exciting. But you also mentioned leverage of cultural institutions, and to rebound on that, I would like to ask to Marina, to the educator Marina this time, perhaps as the architect Marina, your point of view as an educator on the leverage that educational institution and cultural institution can have in their relationship with power. You mentioned a power of influence. You mentioned a power of influence, especially perhaps in the context of the Bengal Institute for Architecture.
Yeah.
And so, what's the nature of that power?
Well, we basically set up Bengal Institute in 2015 with the
Perhaps it's important to
patronage
give
with
a small context on the
yeah.
institute.
So the Bengal Foundation, as you know, was actually the chairman himself was the one who initiated this entire project, and they were patronizing also the institute. Till date, they do that. So the idea of the institute was it's a multidisciplinary platform where all different disciplines like architecture, urban design, planning, landscape, and all other affiliated disciplines can come together and create a certain kind of a voice that would be for the social environmental changes that we can predict. And especially in case of Bangladesh, and you've already been here, some of you are traveling, so you've already seen Dhaka, and it's a very vibrant and energetic place, but at the same time there are a lot of challenges in terms of infrastructure, the density and everything. So how do you tackle these challenges? So Dhaka, which is actually a very, in terms of urban project, anywhere on earth, it's a topic of discussion actually. How does Dhaka really work? It works actually. And so, at times we say that Dhaka is not a problem, probably Dhaka is the solution. So we need to also look at that. So basically, thinking of all these different things, and also the fact that Bangladesh is a small country, a small landmass, and with a lot of rivers, like we have more than 700 rivers crisscrossing the entire landscape. So keeping these very, very unique nature of our landscape, and also keeping in mind that we have more than 150 million people living within this land, how you can actually plan the entire country to have the best possible outcome of the landscape. So that was the idea that was initiated in the beginning. And so based on that we've worked. And you just cannot just be an institution and do something and not have any connection to the power, because ultimately power is what realizes the entire. And so you have to make changes in the policy level. You have to create guidelines that would probably be followed then by, be taken in. So we decided that, if we just make an institution sit there, wait for the government to come and give us project, that probably will never happen. So we started creating our own projects. All the different, like let's say, maybe a street of Dhaka, the riverbank, small towns. So we created our own projects, and we've already done a lot of research works where we've taken some part of Sylhet, or maybe Manikganj as a town, and maybe Mongla as a town. So, all cities and small towns have certain characters, and also how you can disperse Dhaka, the entire population, and maybe take it out into the fringe, the other smaller towns which are around Dhaka, and maybe sort of create a much more healthier, dense city to some extent. So we've done a lot of research in those sectors, and quite often what we do is, what we believe that if we are trained to have visions, we're trained that way, so we can visualize things, we can project certain ideas based on, so we basically create those visions, and then we bring in politicians, we create exhibitions, we make presentations, and we try to engage with them. So, even if they don't take our entire idea, even if they take a few of those and implement that, or even take it and include that within their own ideas, even that's I think is an achievement. So that's what we are sort of trying to do. And in many ways it has worked, and many of the small town mayors are coming to us, which is a nice thing in a way, because the mayors come and we don't charge them basically, we just give them for free. And so they just get a nice drawing, a vision for their own town, a small town, and which they can probably, I don't know if they can implement the entire thing, but at least they have a vision, which the small towns do not really have. So that's how we've been trying to work. And the other thing, what we do through the academic courses, where we bring in professors, academics from all over the world, researchers, and we're trying to build up the younger generation of architects, planners, landscape architects, whoever are there, or even from other disciplines as well. We are open to all disciplines, whoever is interested to come, and we do have academic courses to sort of give them different kind of professional training so that the younger generation is ready to take on the charges. So basically, we're doing both at the same time. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you. In terms of power of influence, it's certainly quite compelling. Yeah, I see we've reached the hour mark, so perhaps I'll open the floor to questions, if there are any.
Thanks so much for bringing all these ideas in this panel discussion. I think it is kind of rare lineup of a panel, especially in a photo festival. And yeah, we often talk about extra disciplines and then ends up expanding the medium or bringing in people who are within the industry. So for us, it's a very interesting experience of knowing about so many interesting strategies. When we talk about solidarity in such a difficult time we are going through in the region, it shouldn't be empathetic solidarity, as you say, it should be a practical solidarity, or maybe a strategic solidarity. And in that sense, this idea of negotiation was really interesting for me when you started talking about negotiating within the, negotiating within the organization itself, more like negotiating inside, and then outside, external negotiation with your community around, with the people who are holding those power. We are also talking about negotiating with the policies. But when we talk about this long-term vision, ideal long-term vision, how we also negotiate with time and its urgency. This is perhaps my own personal question within also this sphere of Chobi Mela, and that's why we were rushing to organize it once again. We knew, there are many other important issues now to resolve, like preparing white documents perhaps, so that you make sure there are long-term strategy of Drik and Pathshala to run. But at the same time, there is also a fear or an extra stress. If you just delay it or postpone, then Chobi Mela might die. And I'm sure there are many other initiatives like this, which died over time. So that's my question to you. How to respond to a time and urgency when a project takes 16 years to be done. Processing fund also takes time. But where are backup plans? Where are the alternatives to respond just immediately? Is there any immediacy in the long-term vision?
Yeah, all my projects take long, really. But anyway, yeah, well, time is a sort of a variable, right? With time, things evolve. That's how I see it. So even if you have a long-term planning, and in most cases, especially when we are doing urban design or urban planning, it's always long-term. It's about 100 years, 200 years. That's how you think that things will turn. And that's why you cannot have a very rigid plan. You can probably plan a certain kind of a structured plan, and then let things evolve. And you basically, as things evolve with time, and the time where we are living in now, it's such a fast time that it's changing every minute, every second. It's a completely different scenario with the technological advancement and everything. So I think we should not be a very rigid framework. We should always keep a very open mind and be accommodative and negotiating in a way. I think it's the best thing you can learn from a Bengali. That's how we are, right? We are very accommodating. We are very negotiating. We can because of the landscape we're living in. I mean, our land is so fragile and so soft and fluid. That's how I think Bengalis think. I mean, they keep a very open mind to any kind of changes and circumstances. And I think the moment you find a challenge, like this time, let's say Chobi Mela is a challenge, you came up with an idea, right? So the idea was not to let it die. And if that's your agenda, then maybe this was a different format. Next year it would probably be a very different format. Just to keep an open mind is, I think, the most time appropriate answer.
A very rough philosophy is live for today and be ready to pack for tomorrow, you know. And I think when Shahidul was speaking yesterday, he talked about pulling out of an exhibition at the last minute, overnight. So I think, and we in Himal, we're looking at the coming political change, and we know there's nothing like settled down. So I think a certain amount of agility in our organizations and having multiple plans and not feeling like this is the only one way of doing things, that which you're talking about, being part of the Bengali psyche. I think that's really important.
From the institutional perspective, maybe the idea of time and negotiation is certainly fitting and interesting.
I would say that, you know, working in any cultural organization, whether it's a quasi-governmental body or in a, you know, really pure art space like Drik or Pathshala, I mean, because you run projects, everything is urgent. And I think one of the biggest challenges, which I've felt in my own work, is that you have to allocate time for your future strategy. Because if not, something's going to hit you and you don't have, as you said, the plan B and the plan C. And I think with what has happened in the last few months is perhaps a perfect time for us to think, yes, okay, you've pulled through the Chobi Mela, but how are we going to build permanent, even if informal, structures for solidarity so that the next time something happens, and it may not be the same thing that happens, something else happens, that we already have a peer network. Particularly, I also say that the Asia, so I mean, there are no structures for Asia sharing, you know. Sometimes it's easier. The Asia-Europe structures are better funded, you have to admit it. So how can we create some sort of permanent but informal mechanism for dialogue in the Asia sphere so that we begin to talk, share, others may have had the same problem, the same solutions. That this conversation goes on parallel to our projects, the urgent stuff, which always consume us. So that we create a permanent strategic space. Every year there's a Pan-Asian meeting. We build these communities. So then comes the question, who's going to fund that annual meeting? So this is where also you can leverage us. You know, if this is an idea that someone wants to put forward, we can find some money through some program. So we build a permanent answer to these problems so that the next time there is a crisis, you have 30 people in that group who have already discussed this issue. You also know that in 2 months we are going to meet for our annual meeting. So on that, we can also use that face-to-face encounter to thrash things out. So I think crisis and emergency is sometimes a moment to think if we are sometimes too operations-oriented, which we always tend to be because operations are urgent, people have to be paid, events have to be done, but no time for strategy, no time for building solidarity as a strategic goal. So I would say from the point of view of a programming institution, of a grantor, happy to think through ideas, and it can also be something across sectors. It doesn't have to be only arts organizations. I think media is also facing the kind of backlash now that arts organizations seem to be facing. So also this different voices, because the arts is very insular, we only talk to ourselves. We never talk across the board sometimes. So maybe a crisis like this is a moment to talk also to donors and funders, and I've been in touch since the events of the last few months with several donors and institutions, all of whom are willing, you know, in spirit to set up a permanent mechanism. So then this is the moment, because we have this urgency because of this case, and maybe the urgency is something that can be translated into some even small pilot project that will then grow. So we have to, I think, make time for strategy, which sometimes is very, very, very difficult.
Thank you. The idea of institutionalizing urgency is interesting. Kind of an oxymoron, but yeah, certainly something to think of. Is there any other question before we get to lunch? Yes. I interrupt?
Not a question at all, but just wanted to, because I wanted to actually propose what you exactly said, because I feel like in the last 6 months with Shahidul's case, I mean, we have been having so many conversations across events, across deadlines, etc. Because, as you say, really what strikes me, the words you use is this making time for strategy building. Because on the one hand, we are going from project to project as cultural institutions, and having to be open-minded and flexible and responsive. But on the other hand, even from the donor side, and for ourselves too, we have to have longer-term visions. And so that dichotomy and that constant pressure of having to do both, at the same time, and we're always underfunded, and we're always small teams, and we're always trying to catch a coffee when we meet at these events once every year or whatever, but we're never able to really sit down, and while the powerful have huge summits where they fly around in their jets and sit down and strategize. And I mean, one thing that I was really struck by was this BIMSTEC summit that happened in Kathmandu, where the Bangladeshi government and the Nepal, it was hosted in Kathmandu, and as a result, quite recently, the Nepali government has introduced a new technology bill that will soon, unfortunately, be pushed through, I think, that really sounds very familiar from the Bangladesh context and the Myanmar context. And so clearly they've had a nice weekend in Kathmandu to sit down and strategize about that. So yeah, I would really echo that sentiment and that need, that urgent need. And I was just looking on your website quickly. It seems Nepal is not a member. Otherwise, I would have offered to host it in Kathmandu. But maybe we could do something about it. A 52-country board, maybe. But I think there's enough interest and momentum now. Unfortunately, the momentum has had to be created. So I think now is really a good time to really think about this. So yeah, just wanted to say that.
Well, thank you for being here, and thank you. It was an honor, pleasure to have this discussion with you. And let's go to lunch then.